Let's try this.
Hello, everybody. This is Grizzly from Lexington, Kentucky. From coast to coast around the world. Hello again. We have a very special guest this evening. We have Val. How you doing, Mr. Val, over there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you as long as you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
You can hear me good?
Yep, sure can.
I'm doing it without the headset here. So. All right.
If you can just tilt your camera down a little bit, I can see your face.
All right. How's that? You want to see that pretty mug? Let's see. How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
All right, my friend. Let's do it.
So tell me a little about yourself.
Well, my name is Val Zavala. I have a Facebook group site called Gumshoe Guy. Gumshoe Guy is a parlance for a private investigator, and I use that name because it kind of sort of describes what I did and what I'm doing now in the Bigfoot community. So I spent 25 and a half years in law enforcement, graduated from Central Michigan University. I'm a lifelong resident of Michigan, and I got involved in Bigfootery back in 2012 when I retired, and in a path that I never really expected. And the topic of Bigfootery is one that I never aspired to. I didn't sit back as a young child and always wished that I wanted to be a Bigfoot, dabble in Bigfoot stuff. And in fact, it took a lot of coaxing for me to step out of the shadow and stop lurking and actually get involved in this stuff. But once I did, and thoroughly and curious, and the rest of it is pretty much history.
So how did you get involved in all this? What made you start?
Well, I got a background. In investigation, and I should say that I was featured on History and A&E channel as a subject matter expert. The acronym for that is SME, S-M-E, and I wrote a published article with a large Eastern Seaboard law enforcement network that picked it up and published it all up and down the eastern states, and including into Ohio and Michigan. It's called Great Lakes Law Enforcement Network organization. From there, I've had stints and experience in federal and state investigations, both in investigatory capacities as well as undercover capacities. So that kind of got me on the way there. And so towards the end of my 25 and a half year career, I felt a need to do something. I wasn't sure what it was, but at that time I was still licensed by the state of Michigan as a private investigator. So when I wasn't working and when I was off the clock, I was doing that sort of thing. So as I got closer to the 25 and a half years, there was something that was going on in my life that, in my personal life, nothing bad. It was just something that I couldn't explain and I couldn't understand right away. And what it was I experienced some odd episodes that were going on. And I took that as a harbinger of something incomplete or something that might lead me to important events in my life. I wasn't for sure what that was. But very quickly and very briefly, I would say that I woke up one night to find an apparition, you might say, or an Indian man in period dress inside my bedroom. And I thought maybe somebody, when I woke up out of the sound sleep, I thought somebody broke in my house. And this is a little odd and unusual for me because, I've never seen anything like this before. But this individual was looking at me, and I tried to wake my wife up, and she wasn't waking up. She wasn't hearing that. But my first thought was reactionary, and that was to get up and kindly go to my closet and grab my gun. Somebody broke into my house dressed like a fool. That's all I knew. But I couldn't get up. And in fact, I don't recall any communication between me and that man, but it was all in the eyes. My eye contact, my eye-to-eye contact with him with me, said everything without words. And that was, I got the feeling that his message to me was he was surprised that I seen him. He was there to assure me that he wasn't there to harm me or anybody in my house and just to relax. He was just passing through. Well, when I understood this, I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, it was light outside. I looked over at the doorway, and there's nothing there. It was gone. But it was odd. It was odd. It was an odd experience, but I filed that away. And shortly after that, a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call out of the blue from a friend of mine asking me if I could meet somebody that wanted to meet me. I don't know who the somebody was. It turned out to be a middle-aged woman. And when I met up with that friend, they introduced me to this woman. And the first thing that this woman says when she looks at me, she says, "You're an old soul. You've been here many times before." She says, "You want me to tell you what you did in your previous life?" And, I'm reluctant about that. I don't know who she is. I never met this woman before. Never seen her before in my life. But, I'm not, for, all I'm concerned about right now is to find out if this woman is legit or is she some nut or something. I've never seen this woman before. But she goes on to say, wherever you go, you have a tall woman in a white dress following you around. And she says, I get the feeling that this is a grandmother figure, somebody that's always looking out for you, always around you. And she covets you. And so I was talking to this lady a little bit more. She talked to me. She says, when I ask you questions, just give me a yes or no. She says, don't give me a long answer. Just make it brief, yes or no. Just confirm or deny it. And she says, do you work alone a lot? And I said, yes. She says, are you sick often? I said, no. She says, she says, what I'm going to tell you is not to alarm you, but to alert you. She says, first of all, she says, I see a red car. I see round red tail lights. It's dark, and I hear gunshots. She says, I'm just telling you to be careful. Well, that was alarming enough for me. She goes on to say, she says, are you looking for somebody? And it raised the flags in my head, and I go, yes. She says, I don't see them, meaning I don't see him or her. She said them, THEM. She says, I don't see them on this plane. Meaning, I don't believe they could be dead, but I don't see anything. I don't feel anything. And then she says, the last thing that this woman tells me is, they know you're looking for them. They'll let you know when they're ready to be found. So what I didn't tell you was that in pursuit of this scheme that I had of unfinished business, I had made a call to a woman down in Ohio, and this is before I was asked to meet with this woman. I made a call to this 80-year-old woman whose son disappeared 30 or 31 years prior to this. He just disappeared. He went traveling from Florida to Texas, and the last call that she got from her son, 18-year-old son at the time, was at a payphone. It was a very brief conversation on a payphone. That's the last time that she seen her son. He disappeared in Lafayette, Louisiana. So from there, I called this woman up at 3 o'clock in the morning and asked her to tell me about everything that she could remember about that phone call. And she did. And she cried and she wept. She told the story of her son, what he said, and her helplessness because she didn't drive. She didn't have a car. She lived in Ohio. How was she going to get down to Louisiana to help her son? That was her baby. And that's where the phone call with her ended with me. But the final thing that I said when she composed herself, because she was weeping, 3 o'clock in the morning, she was weeping and crying. The final thing that I said to her was, I'm gonna promise you now, I'm gonna find your son. I'm gonna look for your son. I'm gonna find him, and I'm gonna bring him home to you. That's my promise to you. She thanked me over and over again, and I still remember that phone conversation. She's deceased now. This is back in 2012. And when I hung up the phone with her, I kind of felt stunned because I couldn't believe what I just told this woman. You know, I promised this woman. This individual fell off the face of the earth 30 years previous. How am I going to find this individual? So I made it my goal, my objective, to use up all my vacation time and sick time that I had on the books to look for this individual, and I did. I went to my administration in my agency that I was working for at the time, and I told them what I was going to do. This was an unofficial investigation, meaning it's not on the books. They're not standing behind me. You know, if something goes wrong, you know, I'm on my own, like a maverick, like I've been all my life. And that meant that whatever devices I used, meaning whatever methods I used, it was all up here. and it wasn't officially any law enforcement tools or computers or anything. I'm a gumshoe guy. That's what I do. And so I took the time, all my off time, all my vacation time. I took days off. I spent hours and hours and hours going back and retracing the route that this young man went missing from, that I knew he was traveling. And some of the things that I came across when I did this brought me in touch with David Pallades, who's 411. I met him, or I spoke with him before in official capacity because of the investigations and stuff that I was doing. I came across some stuff in Canada we chit-chatted about. And so after hearing some of his radio programs, it brought to mind some things. And when I started looking at these huge, massive databases that's available to members of the public, it's strictly for missing people. It's called NAMUS. The acronym is NAMUS, NAMUS. It contains hundreds and hundreds of people. And it's a tool available to anybody. However, when you're law enforcement, you have a little more status. You can read things a little that are available to law enforcement that isn't available to the general public, and that's the difference. Knowing that, and spending all this time, these hours looking for all these pictures, and I'm going to tell you something. It wasn't comfortable looking at all these pictures of people found, people not identified, and still not coming up with the individual I wanted. At the time, I was associated with a large international intelligence group. And the last thing that I did before I retired was, and let me back up a moment. When you retire, your ties are cut with everybody. I mean, you're no longer in any of these groups, these associations, because of security issues. That's just the way it is. That's the reality. Well, while I was still there, I asked that this wide, vast group for acronyms down in Louisiana. I needed to know something. That's pretty fundamental. When I got the names of these people, and I got to talk to individuals down there in Louisiana, and the problem that we ran into was, number one, there was no missing persons report. And when I spoke with the mother from Ohio, 30 years previous, she said that the sheriff of that Louisiana town promised her that he would create a missing persons report and look for this missing individual, this young man. Well, 30 years later, when I'm on the scene, going back and to retrace all this stuff, I come to find out that the sheriff had lied to this woman. And so this woman, for all these years, was grieving over her missing son and never knew that the sheriff lied to her. Because she kept all of her records, like I do, she pulls out, that night that I called her, she pulled out a Ohio bill, telephone bill, with record of that phone call, that collect call that she took from Louisiana 30 years previous. And there the phone number is. So I asked this investigator down in Ohio, or in Louisiana, I says, who is this number? And I read off the number, and I could hear his pen drop. And he said, that's the old sheriff's office. That's his old phone number. I says, is his name so-and-so? I read off the name. He says, yeah. He says, that was our old sheriff. That was 30 years ago. He's dead and gone now. I says, well, this man told me that he made a missing persons report for this individual I'm looking for. Well, he says, we don't have any record of that. And he checked. So I says, this is what I need to do. I need a missing persons report. He says, okay, well, when did it happen? I said, 30 years ago. And he was a little shocked. Here I am, a police officer from another state, looking for an individual, missing individual, had disappeared 30 years ago. And he says, I got to get the okay from my administration before I do this. I said, okay. I went back down to Ohio. I took a report, just I would do for anything. Came back, got in touch with this investigator. Now I got the information. I got his date of birth. I got a picture of his face. I says, I'm ready for this. I know intuitively I need a report. If there's no missing persons report ever on this individual, my chances of finding him are nil to none. It's not going to happen. I know for a fact that everything goes around a computer. Your name, anybody's name. If you're looking for somebody, it's got to be in the computer. It's got to be in the system. If it's not in the system, he doesn't exist. And that's the roadblock that I ran into. Excuse me. How does this get into Bigfootery? I'll tell you in a minute. Very quickly. I'll sum it up like this. When I called this woman and made that promise to her, that was done as a matter of paying it forward. And we all understand what paying it forward means. It means free gratis. It means you're doing something, you're doing an act from the compassion and the goodness of your heart to help somebody else. No matter how hard it is, no matter what kind of obstacle you run into, this is what you're going to do, and this is what I promise to do. And so I made contact with the forensic scientist down there in Louisiana, New Orleans, because that is where I understood the state did their testing. And I asked them, I said, I identified myself. I told them this was an unofficial investigation. I was doing this as an individual, but I needed DNA tests. And they explained to me that it's very, very costly, very expensive, and that they don't normally do that kind of testing for out-of-state people without a charge. When I explained to them that I was doing this as an act of paying it forward, no cost, no charge, they turned around and said, tomorrow morning, be waiting at your door because you're going to get next day air service delivered to you. You're going to have your DNA kits, 2 of them, and we'll test them. So what I'm saying is that little act of paying it forward was in turn allowed them to do the same thing, and they expressed it by sending me the DNA kits, very expensive DNA kits, and did the testing free gratis as their way of paying it forward. So I took the test kit down to Ohio, did the sampling, got a sample from the mother and his living sister, which gives the road maps, if it's good, gives road maps of the individual I'm looking for. In my previous experience in law enforcement, I know that when an individual is taken into a county examiner or another examiner's office in an autopsy, they always take a specimen and set it aside, much the same way that a librarian catalogs a book or a magazine. They stash it away. Even if the science isn't there now, they know intuitively that the science will catch up to them someday. And so for that reason, it was in 1980, DNA, and I knew this, DNA didn't come to the United States until the 1990s. It was tested and started in the UK, and then it came here. So when this individual went missing, there was no DNA. Therefore, that John Doe couldn't be placed in the computer as a John Doe with that DNA sample because it didn't exist then. It wasn't until I went out and brought that sample in with that report, which gave me a report number, then it gave the red light, they gave it the green light to the computer and put it all over the country. In the event that this individual shows up or comes in, there's a DNA identification to him. So with that information, it was in the system. I was pretty happy with that. They were good specimen samples, and I had to do is wait. In the meantime, in my travels, I spoke with a old retired Houston Chronicle crime reporter who told me that during the time that my guy disappeared, there were no fewer than 28 serial killers on the loose in that area, in that Houston, Arkansas, Louisiana area, in that corridor, that whole corridor. The public wasn't aware of this because as news reporters, editors only allow what they're allowed to print, and that wasn't allowed for public consumption at the time. Nevertheless, 21 months later, we get a phone call from a medical examiner down in Houston, Texas. They want to talk to me. And when I come in, I talk to her, and she says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. I says, well, I suck at poker. I play chess. Give me the good news first. We got him. We know where he's at. I said, what's the bad news? She said, homicide. I says, can I get the officer in charge, his name, his phone number, and also I says, can you tell me what property he had with him? She did. Nevertheless, I got the information, made the contact, did the notification as I was supposed to with the family, and from there, another 3 months to cut through the governmental bureaucratic red tape to transport human remains beyond state lines, federal lines, interstates, and so forth. It's a lot of paperwork. Nevertheless, we got back to Ohio. I delivered his as the family requested, and that next workday, I went in, had lunch with my friends, and I worked midnights for 15 years. Had lunch with my friends, paid their bill, went back to the precinct, brought my gear back in, put it in the locker, told the commander, I said, I'm going home. He says, are you sick, Val? I said, no. Are you taking vacation time? I said, no. I says, I'm retired. And he came out, and as is custom in police culture, when you retire, he comes out, shakes your hand, you take off your badges, hand over your badges, unarm your weapon, hand it over, and he hands the weapon back to you. And he tells you, good job. That's your present. the gun that you carry, all those years, that's your gun. Then they take you into dispatch and they make the announcement all over the Southeast Michigan area, announcing that you retired. And it's pretty touching. It's a pretty touching experience to go through. But nevertheless, I have all this time in my hand, and I can't get the picture of all these missing individuals out of my mind. I mean, I've looked through a lot of them, and some of them were not pretty to see. And so I reconnected with a friend of mine who was a professional archivist, and I says, "Can you look up all the news articles on the 1965 Monroe Monster?" And when she did, I went through these things, looked at them, and I got out of the phone and I contacted a well-known Michigan Bigfoot icon, an older gentleman, and I explained to him what I was doing. And I says, "I want to know about this Bigfoot Sasquatch. Is that true?" And he convinced me that it was, although I really wasn't convinced that it existed. But I agreed to go out with him, follow him around Bigfoot speaking tours and stuff. And I went out hiking with him and learned everything that I could, picked his brain. And almost 2 years back that I was out, July 19th, 2014, I was with him. I went to a Michigan state park. We were hiking. And Grizzly, sure enough, sure as I'm here talking to you today, there it is. That's what you've been looking for. And it's on the tree. This thing was over 8 foot tall. It was probably closer to 9 foot tall. All hairy. The face had very little hair on it. I mean, I've seen pictures of the patty. This was not a patty. This was a freak. It was a freak of nature. I said so as much when I seen it. We had gotten into we had just crossed a couple agricultural fields, got into a thicket. The mosquitoes, I remember the mosquitoes and flies were just tearing us to pieces. So much so that we had went through 2 of those spray bottles off.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they were tearing us up. It was July. It was hot and humid. And we got into that thicket. And the first thing that I remember before this sighting occurred was my partner, Bob Daigle, stopping me. And he says, "Val," and it was only 2 of us. It was me and him. So it was not a large crowd. He says, "Val, do you hear that?" And yeah, I heard what sounded to me like flickering of leaves, like something was being tossed at us. And I said, and I looked at him and I said, "Well, that sounds like acorns, falling through the trees. How are the acorns falling through the trees?" Well, we walked on there and we heard that first crack. The first crack is so loud, it's not a twig. If you take a twig and snap it in half, this was not a twig. My friend, this was like a board being broken in half. And out there, it had to have been a thick branch. But it was so sharp, so loud, it sounded like a gunshot report. You're there in the woods, you can hear it. And we stopped. That stopped us in our tracks. And we both looked at each other, mouthed something to each other, and kept walking forward. Looking back at this incident in hindsight, I should have picked up on the tell. The first tell was the flies, mosquitoes. Remember, if you're a hunter and if you're a hunter's guide, and especially if it's in summer, one of the sure things that's going to tell you that you're close is either you're going to see or you're going to see flies, mosquitoes, the bugs around. They follow these things around. They stink, and the flies follow them in cloud. I've never seen so many flies in my life, and they were biting me. I was miserable. I was hot, sweaty, and miserable. And the bugs were biting me. And we got a little further, and we hear another branch break, big one. So we finally come into an area where a large tree had fallen. I don't know if it was pushed over, but it was fallen. It was on the ground. And it was big enough that neither one of us could step over it to get on the other side. We had to sit on our butts and scooch over to the other side of it. Nevertheless, Bob is on the other side, and on the other side of this tree is a huge nest, Bigfoot nest, like with a tunnel inside of it, big enough for a 7 or 8 foot something in there. So Bob is on his hands and knees looking down there. Neither one of us brought a flashlight with us to see if there's anything in there. And while he's doing it, looking around on the trees, looking all around, and there, I see it with a tree. Something that's not natural, not right. And so I turned around. I only had a cheap Kodak camera with me, digital, but it was cheap. I mean, after all, I mean, it was more than anything, it was just a symbol. I didn't expect to see anything, and if I lost the camera, I wouldn't be at loss of anything of great value. So it didn't really bother me. So I turn around, look at him, try to mouth the words to him. I see something here. And when I did that, I took the camera and made a 180-degree arc, just snapping away without giving out any indication that I was going to turn around and start snapping photos. But what I did, Grizzly, I did capture the thing on the tree, and it was looking at me, and it exposed its entire right side to me, from the head all the way down to the ankle. In the tree, next to that being, which was red-haired, the colored coats, the suits. Next to that being in the tree was a second being who was all yellow, blonde-haired, like a wolf man. And it was sitting up in the tree, and it was looking off in another direction as though it was uninterested in us down there on the ground. And I can't tell you how much time went by, but what I can tell you, again, with the eyes, eye contact, I mouthed the words, "What the F?" And I'm not the type of person to use a lot of profanities. I just don't. But I have. And in that time, I might have said, "What the F? Are you kidding me already?" That's my exact words. Are you kidding me already? I thought it was a human being. I thought it was a joke. And I thought by provoking it, I would get it to smile, get the man or whoever it was dressed up like that to smile, crack a smile. And it just stood there blinking its eyes at me. And finally I says, "You freak, you. You freak." It still didn't, it didn't evoke any kind of emotion, no response. And I know I carried my weapon on my left side, so I was turned around. I know it seen my weapon on my side. But to me, the feeling of being under the influence, and I call it under the influence of infrasound, was a lot like people describe as being hypnotized.
Right.
And that's the feeling I got. And I was completely lucid in thought. But again, measuring this and weighing this experience with my personal experiences with danger and extraordinary events, I could tell you that I was involved in a head-on car collision, and I honestly thought I was dead. But in that incident, similar to the Bigfoot sighting, the two incidences, to me, in my sense, were very similar because it was very, very stressful. And as the case with the car collision, I knew that I felt as though, well, I reconciled with myself in thinking, and this all happens in a matter of seconds.
Right.
Everything slows down, and I'm looking at things in what appears to be, to me, it appears to be in black and white, not color, but black and white. It looks like somebody standing in front of me with black and white photos, showing me these photos, and I see myself, I see them, I see what I'm looking at, but I'm completely lucid, completely rational in thought. And here I am, I find myself calculating formulas in mathematics that I've never done before. Never. I mean, I graduated from Michigan University. I graduated in math. I mean, that's history, reading, English. That's my specialty. But not in math. And so here in this situation again at the state park with the Bigfoot, I'm thinking that this is how, whatever I'm feeling, whatever's going on right now, exactly how people disappear. This is how animals become victim of this thing, because it puts it under that, I don't know what it is, that hypnotism or whatever it was, and they become immobilized. They become incapacitated, and that's the way I felt. But I also knew, in my mind, again, I'm thinking lucidly, that I cannot go to sleep. I felt like I was getting tired. I felt like I was very, very fatigued. Like the energy was being drained right out of me. But I also had a sense, obviously, and I'll tell you and your audience right now. And this is something that I mentioned to Janice Carter in our conversations about this. I felt as though, looking at this thing in its eyes, it looking at me in my eyes, I felt as though its eyes were piercing my soul, looking right through me. And when I mentioned this to Janice, her reply to me was, "It was reading you." Hey, I don't know anything about Bigfoot, but tell me what reading me is about. And explain to me why checking you to see what kind of person you were, what you had in your heart as an individual.
Right.
I let it go at that. I don't know any better than that, but I let it go at that. So what I felt and what I felt was that I could not go to sleep. I felt laying right down there on the ground and going to sleep. And the only thing that relieved me of that sensation was my sense of free will. And look at me in my big brown eyes, and I tell you, because I say this from my heart. God gives us free will when we're born. We all know this. We're human beings. That's the greatest gift that He gave us. When I thought that, the thought of free will, immediately, almost immediately, that sensation relieved itself and lifted itself from me. And I told Bob, I was ready to go. And I told Bob, I says, we have to leave now. Bob stalled, and Bob asking questions. Well, what do you mean by that? All of a sudden, you want to leave? We got to leave. I said, we have to leave now. Because the feeling that I got, the sensation that I got, the thoughts I got was, It wasn't one of love and happiness. There's the Aquarius. It was one of hatred and a boding, and I didn't like that because I couldn't control it. Whatever this thing was, it was very, very powerful, very powerful. You think you're strong, you think you're bad. No, in the presence, it's immense, and it's very strong, and you get that. Any smart man would figure that out. So it was time to leave, and we left. And I mean, I couldn't run out of there fast enough. And we break out of the tree line back to the edge of that agricultural field, and right there, when we start to step, see a footprint and a track. We stopped. We took a picture of it. These pictures that I'm talking about are on my group site today. I always put them up there. It was 17 and a half inches. You take a 17 and a half inch print, multiply it by 6.5, that's the formula. That comes out to 8.5, 9 foot. Now, in my mind, I told Rob, we're not going to cast this. I says, I just want to leave. In my mind, I could envision something coming out of that woods on all fours. And if it did, I told Bob I was going to have a heart attack right there. If that thing if it came out of the wood line, I was going to have a heart attack, drop down right there. I'm done. But we did. We got back. He drove me back to my car. For some reason, I felt very, very tired. I felt it was dark. It was dark when we got out. It wasn't dark when we were in there, but somehow all this time went by. And now I feel hungry. I yearn. I had this unnatural yearn for cheese. And I couldn't figure it out because I'm not really a cheese eater. And I don't like cheeseburgers, but I went to McDonald's and got a cheeseburger for my 50-mile drive home alone.
Huh.
And as soon as I did, I got home and I couldn't wait to get home. That memory card on the computer, just to confirm I thought I seen. I mean, I know I wasn't dreaming. I seen what I seen. And sure enough, as soon as I put that memory card on the computer and upload this, there it is. And it was already 11 o'clock, 11:30. I called Bob up and I said, "You're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this at all." And then he's seen it. I sent the picture to him. He's seen it. He had no words. And so what I learned from this whole experience is even your closest friends, when you show them stuff like this, the first natural thing that they do is question it. They want to know if you did something. If I did some CGI, if I manipulated the photograph or anything like that. But I'll tell you this: what you see is what you get with me. I have no special expertise in forensic pixelization. I'm not a computer expert. I know a little bit about it. But that's not my forte. That's not what I do. And I would never do that. But such is life, and that's the learning experience that I gained from this. So then when I talk to people, they're a little hesitant about posting their supposed Bigfoot photos. I remind them of what I went through, because I really do understand the hesitation, the intrepidation that they feel. I really do. And I sympathize and and I show empathy with them because I've been there and I've done that. The hardest thing for me was sharing that with the public, because you're allowing strangers to critique what you've seen. You know in your heart what you've seen. There's the photo. And when they look at some of these people, I call them trolls. When they look at the photo, they say, "Oh, that's a tree stump." No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Not happy. Not happy. Not with me. Not with me. No. No. So that set me on the path of where I'm at. So what I did in the meantime, obviously, I took the training, the experience, the abilities, and I set up 4 databases. 4. I live in Michigan. I'm a Michigan resident. I set up a Michigan Bigfoot database. I set up a U.S. North American database, and I set up a reference. The reference book compiles over 195 data points of topics of most any topic that you can imagine. And to this day, I'm still adding information to it. So on a spoof, yesterday, somebody posted a question. I thought it was a genius question. Somebody on the group site posted a question. He says, with all today's technology, why not better proof of Bigfoot? Well, I'm not going to let a good opportunity pass by. So I took the time very quickly to come up with some figures for him. It's a good question. And I told him, I said, that's an excellent question. And it's one of the questions that it would help other people to understand how vast and large this is. So if you or your audience haven't got the impression yet, I read a lot, and what I do, I read, I analyze reports, I measure them, I quantify them, and I look for anomalies. I look for patterns and anomalies in behavior. You might say, you or your audience might say, I'm a profiler, and I profile Bigfoot. That's what I do. I look at the dates, I look at the years, the months, the days, the times, the hours, the seasons. I look at all this stuff, and then I look at the different types of behaviors. I look for anomalies. Anomalies to me stand out like red flags. So imagine going through, for instance, Grizzly, imagine going through 128,000 Bigfoot reports and searching for red flags and anomalies and patterns. That's what I do. So what does that mean to me? You, what does that to your audience right now? I can say right here, and I'm just reading the information that I have jotted down here from last night. I've got a double monitor, so I'll do this pretty easily. To answer that question, if with all today's technology, why not better proof of Bigfoot? And I told the man, I says, that's an excellent question. But first of all, to me, the better question is, what is proof? I mean, it's easier for somebody to say that. It's another thing for that somebody to even understand what proof is. A lot of people don't know what it is. Do you know what it is, Rick? Proof is a fact demonstrating something to be real or true. What does that mean? Well, I know for a fact that there are 6,338 Bigfoot reports made by campers all across U.S. North America, not just Michigan, but all across U.S. North America. I know for a fact that farmers all across U.S. and North America have made 2,607 Bigfoot reports or encounters or had encounters. I know that hikers all across the U.S. and North America have made over 10,907 Bigfoot reports or encounters. Bicyclists, motorcycles, 501. Boaters, people on the boats, on the lakes and ponds and stuff, 770. Fishermen, I like to fish. You probably do. A lot of women like to fish, but people fishing have had encounters or sightings over 1,788 times. Hunters, 5,203. When you talk about 5,000 people, that's an army. That's a small army of people. Motorists, almost 8,000 motorists have reported sightings and had encounters. Parked vehicles. I mean, people say, Val, what would I do when I have an encounter or something? Well, first of all, you got to know where they're happening, where they've been reported, and that's what I look at. I said, if you're going to be in a car, you can be driving where they've been known to be, or you can be in a parked vehicle. They're very, very curious, especially a parked vehicle. Residences. You don't have to go anywhere or do anything. They come to you. And this is what I don't understand when people get angry. People that aren't aware, they're not familiar, not informed. They seem to think that bad human, good Bigfoot. You go out there and you're tormenting Bigfoot. You go out in the woods. Well, that's not true. That is not true. The data shows that that's not true. The data doesn't play that out. People in residences and businesses have had and reported over 7,336 reports. That's a lot of Bigfoot coming to the door, knocking on the door, trying the doors, peeking in the windows, that kind of stuff. Pounding on the, that's a lot. That is a lot. So you're getting down to the final end here. One of the things that I don't like, and I take dear to my heart because I love the kids, I love my kids, my grandchildren, watching kids. 1,104 instances of watching kids. I don't want any beast gazing at my kid. No, I don't want that. I don't want it. I've come across too many reports of attempted abductions. I don't want that. That's not me. I don't care what people say. They can laugh and giggle and feed the Bigfoot peanut butter and honey and anything that they want, but leave your hands off the kids and stay away from the kids. Don't mess with the kids. That's the way I look. So does the authorities aware that yes, they've been involved, kicking and screaming, reluctantly, over 1,973 times. Yeah, they've been involved. They know. Well, what about the military? Military has been involved 371 times. This is all across the U.S. and North America. Then, when we're talking about other non-governmental agencies, we're talking about Forestry Service, we're talking about any other government agency that's not law enforcement. We're talking about over 1,000 instances, sightings. That's a whole lot. We're talking about reported vocals. I mean, yeah, I'm not here to tell you that every vocal that we hear out in the woods is a Bigfoot. But what I'm telling you is when you got vocals reported in combination with thrown objects, stick structures, Bigfoot tracks, tree shaking, and things of that nature. Yeah, that's. I would say that's that's what they do. So you got 8,000, over 8,000 of those reports. Wood knocks 433 times that they've been recorded and reported. Throwing objects over 1,000 times. How many tracks have we reported across U.S., North America? Well, if you're talking specifically about five-toed tracks, there's over 6,000 of those reports across U.S. and North America. However, if we're talking about three-toed tracks, how many times have you ever heard that? If you're talking about four-toed tracks, how many times have you heard that? If you're talking about six-toed tracks, how many times have you heard that? When you're talking about the types of tracks, the 3, the 4, the 6, nearly 500 of those reports across U.S. and North America. Hello. And then the question is, where's the proof? Well, that's 128,000. I mean, I don't know what more I can do for you. I tell these people, I'm not going to do your research for you. What I do, Grizzly, is out of the compassion of my heart. I share a lot of this stuff for free. A lot of people have taken my stuff, my information, my data, my research, incorporated it into a book, or they go on to a talk show and claim it as their own. I'm not going to do this for people. I'm not going to allow people to take my work and make a profit out of it. I'm not doing that. And
right.
So, pardon me and excuse me if I don't do enough for you. I just feel like I give a lot to people, a lot more than a lot of people do, and that's what I do. So I know I covered a lot of stuff here. So basically, when I'm looking at these databases, Grizzly, the databases are started out in sets, and every set, like a primary set for me, would be major primary activities that people are involved in when they have sightings and encounters. For me, that would be camping, hiking, farming, and hunting, and residences and motorists. Those are the primary areas. When I pick up a report, pick up a report, that's the first thing that I'm looking at. I'm looking at the date, the time, the location, and what type of activity they were involved in when they had this alleged sighting. From there, I know in my mind there's dozens of subgroups and subsets underneath these things, such as, for instance, farming. I know that riding people ride horses. They ride horses for on the farm for leisure. They use horseback for hunting, and in boating. Some of the summer activities besides hiking is riding bikes, riding motorcycles, fishing and boating. All of these areas, all of these different subsets are consistent with the major primary sets and groupings. I even look at snowmobiling up here in the Great Lakes. Snowmobiles are big things. I could say that at least in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, where we get a lot of snow, I'm sure Pennsylvania, we get a lot of snow. Snowmobiles are a big thing. And people have a lot of sightings and encounters on snowmobiles. And that goes with ATV vehicles as well in the summertime when you're out camping, hiking, hunting. It's the loud noise, these things. So there's a lot of stuff, 195 different data sets and stuff. It goes into that one database. It looks a lot like an encyclopedia, and it's got sourced reports. It's got it's got information on 195 different topics and stuff. So, is there any questions that you could have?
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's a lot of work, is what it is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The people, some people, I've never, ever said that this is empirical science. It's not for me. It's replete with error, human error. I'm an imperfect man. I live in an imperfect world, and I make mistakes just like everybody else. And it's a good thing, and it's a good thing too, because if it wasn't, they wouldn't have a market for pencils and erasers, because we're not perfect. And what I tried to do is look at this realistically and walk away with a sense of accomplishment, thinking that I know a little bit more than I did yesterday because of what I read, what I researched and stuff. Some of the stuff that I've come across is almost hard to believe. One of the things that I don't like to do, and I kind of push aside when it's brought up, is when people want to talk about UFOs. I'm not a UFO guy. I don't enjoy talking about that, but in full transparency, I'll say that there's a lot of connection, and this is just for me. This is my opinion. This is what I've seen, 108,000 reports. There's a lot of connection. Co-joining Bigfoots with UFOs. In other words, when you see a Bigfoot report, there's a UFO or some type of UFO mentioned in that report. For me, is it a coincidence or is there something? I'm not a scientist, Grizzly. I'm just a man. And for me, when I look at this, if I see this one time, it's an anomaly. If I see it two times, it opens my eyes, and I say, "Well, wait a minute. Let me look. Let me just look at this." If I see it more than three times, what they used to say about coincidences, once an anomaly, the second time is keep an eye out. The third time it happens, it's enemy action. There's no such thing as coincidence. So when I see this repeatedly occur over and over again, over a dozen times, 4 dozen times, there has to be something there to it. But I'm not going to talk about it because it's, that's not which way I'm going to go with this. So, yeah, it's been very, very interesting. Some of the things that I've learned here. So
It has been very interesting. I never seen somebody collect so much data.
mm-hmm. I have done the best I could trying to come up with numbers of people killed and people injured. And that's one area that, a lot of people They don't want to hear that because in their mind, these things are like pets. They're not pets. If they were pets, and people say, "Oh, well, Bigfoots are just like primates." You know, a lot of people describe them as hairy apes. A lot of people describe them as bears. Do we go up to bears? Do we give candy and sandwiches to bears? Why don't we do that? If they were alive. Well, let me ask you something. Why do they put gorillas behind thick safety glass and stuff, and behind bars and barriers? If and I'll tell you the reason why we do that. The insurance companies, the liability is so great and so heavy that whatever city, whatever jurisdiction that those things are in, and I'm talking about zoos now, it's so great that they have to do this. You can't have them around people with zero barriers. So why would anybody in their right mind not give the same leeway, the same precaution to Sasquatch, Bigfoot? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they tell the public? You know, yeah, they're true. They live. Just be careful. Don't, stay out of their way.
But they're cute and furry.
What's that?
I said, but they're cute and furry.
Yeah, they're cute and furry, but they're not toys and they're not pets. Bigfoot, Sasquatch are very. They can be very vicious. They can be very cruel. They can be unforgiving and unrelenting. And that's what a lot of people find out when they start gifting, playing love and stuff. And these things are like experts at lulling you or lulling me, lulling the next person into this fun game. I'll run a little bit, you chase me, and then we'll stop. You feed me something, I'll take it, and I'll play cute and smile at you. I'll show you some teeth, but you keep feeding me. When that person stops feeding, that's when the individuals get followed home. That's when they start getting their homes damaged and terrorized and stuff like that. And a lot of people can't handle that. To me, when they start the gifting and that virtue in their mind, they feel it's a good thing, it's a good deed. What they're not thinking about is what happens when I get tired of it. What happens when, I don't know, we run out of food. I can't feed you anymore. You started a game, and I'm talking about people that gift and stuff. You started a game, you had no ideas what the rules of the games were. You did that. And so when you stop or you get tired or you get intimidated, because not only are they coming around, but the whole clan's coming around. That they can get a little frightened, a little intimidation. When you stop feeding them, they'll let you know when they're hungry. And if you don't feed them, they may take your door off and come and take your refrigerator, take everything out of there for you, help you out a little bit. Neighbors see. So what do people do? They flee, especially if they have kids. They flee, sell their property for cheap. They want to get out of there. And usually when they sell their property for cheap, that ought to set up red flags automatically that something's wrong. And then you and I come along, we see cheap property, good, beautiful property.
Right.
So we buy it. We don't know what the history is. All we know is it was cheap and it was good property. So we go about our business. We get those tinglies. We get those feelings of about being watched. We can't explain it, and we might hear some growls. We don't know where it's coming from. We might hear at 3 o'clock in the morning somebody pounding on the wall. It sounds like they want to break through the walls of the house. We might be in bed sleeping 3 o'clock in the morning and something be clambering around on the roof, and you know it's not Christmas. You know it's not Santa Claus up here. You might be sleeping 3 o'clock in the morning. You got kids. They might be frightened to death, screaming and crying, terrified that they had a monster looking in the window. If you have a garden, you come out there and you got fruit trees. They're stripped bare, but you got some huge tracks out there all over the yard and the garden and stuff. Your tomatoes all gone. Nothing left. Because remember, these things have a voracious appetite, one that you and I couldn't even wish for. So, and other things that go with, as a result of this gifting is any things that you have in your yard might be broken or stolen. Oh, they steal a lot. Women have had, back in the day when women used to hang their laundry out on the clotheslines in the backyard, they'd have them steal the whole lot. Where are those clothes going? Why do they take the clothes? A lot of this stuff, pets, dogs, dogs are beautiful animals. We love them. I don't want to go outside and see my dog hanging from something.
Right.
I don't ever want to see that. That's what happens to a lot of people. They're very vindictive. Like I said, unforgiving. And you've heard stories about people that have shot these things. Some people say, oh, they never die. They do. They do die. And people have shot them. There are hundreds. But I don't see, from this standpoint, I don't see people going out there just for the sport of it doing that. From what I see, when I'm talking to people, again, some closed-minded people have this idea that all men, and they talk about men, they don't talk about women, but they talk about men. All men do is go out there and just shoot everything that moves. That's not so. That's just not true. From what I see, the hunters and most people are very, very they're very, very good ambassadors of goodwill. They really are. I mean, sure, we see stuff on the news and stuff like that, but you got to remember, and I live in the city, I'm not used to seeing an 8-foot man all full of hair walking out here on the front sidewalk screaming at me.
Absolutely not.
I don't know who would put up with that. I wouldn't expect myself to be very accommodating if something like that came on my porch and rang the doorbell. I mean, I'm just not doing it. Common sense and natural reaction is that I would be very, very defensive. So when you take all these things into account, people are very, very conscientious of that, and they do look a lot like human beings, only bigger and different. So what I can say is the data shows there is a 3-to-1 ratio between aggressive reports and gunfire, meaning people would respond with weapons and stuff.
Right.
3-to-1. How does that happen? How does that happen? I mean, if people were bloodlusting like some people envision, data would reflect that. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen. What I can also say is that there's a common misconception that Bigfoots only help people. That's all they do. And they go around the world helping you, and they help me tie my shoe, and they might lift a car off of you, you know, if the car falls in. You know, that's one of the data sets that I look at and I look for. And to be honest with you, I don't see a lot of them. There's not very many at all. Yeah, there's some that we've all heard about, the little boy in North Carolina that went missing. And he claims, he told authorities that a bear kept him, you know, overnight, kept him warm when it was cold. And he was there to talk about the little boy. I believe that happened, but it wasn't a bear. I mean, everybody pretty much knows that.
Yeah, a bear would have mauled him.
No. Well, bears are usually hibernating in the wintertime. But, you know, when you see these things, Grizzly, you kind of got to balance them back and forth. So if there's a 3-to-1 ratio between aggressive reports and gunfire, it tells you that there's something not right with people's notion that, you know, everybody's out there looking around hunting for Bigfoot. That's not true. It doesn't happen like that. And when you take a 3-to-1 ratio and just measure it and weigh it against Good Samaritan acts, you know, there's no measuring that. It's obvious that there's something wrong with the situation and stuff.
I agree with that. I mean, that's very reasonable. So
it's the whole thing is pretty interesting. It says a lot. It tells a lot. It's a lot of strange things going on there. One of the things that I find interesting in that one database, the encyclopedia type database, is Bigfoot's wearing clothes. I mean, for some people, again, they don't know anything about Bigfoots, but they can't wrap this in their head. This is impossible. How does this happen? It's true. It is true. Now, I've spoken with many people. A friend of mine in Michigan, he's had an early childhood experience with one juvenile that very briefly, him and his 2 little friends in the foreign country befriended a juvenile Bigfoot. And it took a little coaching. They came out at cornfield, they ran cars and trucks with it. Had a basketball. They threw it back and forth, and they kind of did this day after day, unbeknownst to the parents. And so over a 3-day period, things started to go bad when the little boy, and I'm talking about 11, 12, 13-year-old boys, told the juvenile Sasquatch, who they named Mike, "You have to go home now because we got to go in and eat supper." And this is a farming community. They got barns and all kinds of stuff. But anyways, so as the story goes, all the boys pick up their toys, their ball, and they wave to Mike, and Mike supposedly waves back. They split up. Mike disappears back into the cornfield. You remember that movie with Kevin Costner?
Yeah.
You know, that's what comes to mind when I'm thinking about this. So the juvenile wanders off into the cornfield, disappears. The boys go back home. This boy that's telling us the story, that's writing the report, goes back to his house, eats supper with mom and dad. Then, as a matter of routine, what he does is he goes out to the old dairy barn and after supper, and I can picture this, goes up in the hayloft and he plays with his cars and trucks up there in the hay by himself. On this particular day, he hears clamoring around, and he sees Mike appear, the juvenile Bigfoot that didn't go home. He's not eating supper. He's coming over to this boy's house again. So he climbs up in the balcony with this boy, and they're starting to play again. But they, all barns have a rope and swing back and forth to the balcony. But so as this goes, they're really playing monkey. There's a young kid, adolescent kid. They're having a great time. Mike is showing the boy, how athletic he is and how well he climbed that rope. And boy, did he climb that rope and swung, with one arm way out there and came back in. So at some point, the boy says, the man recounting the story says that, we were playing like boys. And he says, I pounded my chest, like Tarzan does, we're playing. And that immediately set this juvenile who turned on aggressively, screaming, showing teeth, canine teeth, and at some point pushed him off the balcony. He fell off the balcony onto the ground, making all this noise. He claims the juvenile leaped from the balcony onto the ground, ripped his clothes off. Are you following me, Grizzly? Ripped his pants off. He's straddling them. Well, in your mind, you're thinking, well, what's going on now? And in doing so, those fingernails ripped into his groin and gave him a severe laceration about his groin. When he ripped the clothes off of him, he's still screaming. The dad hearing this scream comes out to the barn, opens up the door. The barn had a double sliding door, one in and out door, and opens the door up and sees this creature on his son. He sees his son bleeding, his son's naked. In his mind, what are you? I mean, we can only imagine as fathers, we can imagine what's rolling around in the dad's head. So the boy says, Dad always kept a shotgun in the barn with a couple shells. So Dad loads up the shotgun, blasts it off a couple times. He says, when that happened, there was some screaming outside from the cornfield in the creek. And all of a sudden, the Bigfoot arrives. She's in the barn. And the father, right behind her, but didn't come into the barn. He says that the female, the mama, picked up the juvenile, who was probably the size of a 12-year-old, and, probably trying to control her belligerent child, who was out of control. Why is he out of control? Because the boy made the mistake of pounding his chest, that gesture. So she was incapable of controlling him, and he got down again, and he tried to get rid of that little boy again. And this time the father let off a couple more blasts, and there the mother left the juvenile along with the father, and they fled, through the cornfield. So the father closed the sliding doors of the barn, and now the thing is still, the juvenile, the belligerent juvenile, still running around the barn screaming, trying to break into the barn to get after this 12-year-old boy again. So this went on and on and on. At some point, the juvenile broke a board or something on the barn and tried to reach his hand and grab it from the dad. And there was a little tussle going on. One of the neighbors on the road must have heard the gunshots because they sent the state police. A trooper showed up. And when the trooper showed up, according to that report I read, the thing came around the barn, and at the time they were using revolvers. So he fired off a couple of shots, not at the thing, but in the air to back it off, and it still wouldn't back it off. Then, a short time later, a natural resources officer shows up as a backup officer, and they see the child. So they call for an ambulance. So there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of sirens and stuff like that. The neighbors, in this close-knit, small farming community, they see a lot of activity, probably a lot of dust in the road and stuff, and gravel flying as they vehicles speeding down the roads, screaming, gunshots. What happens is they found out the only way that they can keep that belligerent juvenile and hold it at bay was by turning on the siren. It was the noise, couldn't handle the noise. So finally, they got the boy into the ambulance, and he was being treated for the laceration. In the meantime, the juvenile Sasquatch went down the road to the other neighbor's house, which was where one of the three boys lived. He went to that house and ran around that house, that farmhouse, pounding on walls. And at one point, according to the person writing this report, claims that that juvenile broke into the house, bathroom window, crawled through the window. The father, while all the screaming is going on outside his house, has all his family herded up into the kitchen, into the living room, dining room. He arms himself, to protect his family. Again, we get back to this notion that people have, people going out there hunting, they don't do it. They protect themselves, just like anybody would. He herded his family up into the dining room, and there he stood, armed. And when that thing came out of the bathroom, he sent it to Valhalla, to another world. And it as soon as it was struck, it turned and ran back through the bathroom, hopped out the window, apparently ran across the road, and they found it dead at a creek where it died. So this is all in a day. This is all in one day. So somehow, for some reason, the boy claims that the family that shot the thing went and found the body, brought it back in the house, and they did their own autopsy at the farm. And what they've seen, what the boy remembers, that the juvenile had two hearts. Hello. When he says he remembers as a boy when they opened up the mouth, how snakes will disengage to gorge themselves a larger prey. He says with what he remembers was when they opened up the mouth of Sasquatch. That's when the long canines popped down. People say, well, they just look like chiclet gums, the square gums. That's what people say that Bigfoot's teeth look like. Although that's not what I see on the reports. I have a lot of reports of Bigfoot with the square teeth. A lot of reports of Bigfoot with large meat cutting teeth. I got some reports of Bigfoot with tusks, like wild boar. But he says that what he remembers as a little boy, when they open up that mouth, those incisors, those canine teeth dropped on them. Anyways, so at some point, one of the took picture of us, probably from a Polaroid, I don't know. Remember, I wasn't there. This happened years ago. Took pictures of us. What did they do? They took it to school as show and tell. And word got around. The boy says, one day I was coming home from school in the school bus, and he said there were some cars. Well, first of all, he said the day after this happened, when I got scratched, he says I came home from school, and there were police and stuff all over my yard, and people in biohazard suits looking around, picking up stuff all over the yard. He says that after they took that picture to school as show and tell, he said he came home from school and there were some more cars, different cars, in parked in the yard. And when he went in there were 3 Native American men who he believed one was from Washington and 2 were from Michigan. And when I say Washington, I'm talking about D.C. And he claims, this is what he claims, when he went in the house, his mom and dad were sitting in the dining room or the living room or someplace. There were 6 national guardsmen and these 3 men. 2 of the men were nice. One of the men were not so nice. And they told him, where is the body? And apparently after they did this autopsy, they buried the body in limestone, for the disease and decay and stuff.
Right.
So they wanted to know where the body was. And the man from Washington, D.C. was very persistent, pretty nasty and threatening to the little boy. They threatened to take him out of the house at some point, and the little boy wasn't going to give up anybody. Remember, that was his friend's house. At one point, he claims that he was from Washington, D.C., ordered one of those guardsmen to go out in the car and get his briefcase. And at that point, there was some argument going on between the guardsmen and the 2 men. And they said, "We're not here to do that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to participate in this. Paid to do that. You're not going to do this to this little boy." And anyways, long story short is that the boy claims that he was surrendered, given something, and that's his memories of that. Anyways, that came from Michigan. Michigan's had some fascinating Bigfoot reports over the years. The database that I have, when I started looking at this, this goes all the way back to the 1700s. Michigan became a state in 1830, around 1835. So these things have been around a long time. The only time in American history that foreign troops have ever left Michigan was during the War of 1812. And there is alleged memoirs from British troops, officers, and American generals talking about Bigfoot, harassing and bringing their troops as they went back and forth from Detroit to Monroe, Frenchtown Township. Excuse me, this has been going on a long time. So, anyway, Grizzly, do you have any other questions for me?
No, I'm just fascinated. I just never heard stories like that or encounters.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable.
It's a lot of stuff.
It is.
It's a lot of stuff. One of the things that I looked at also going into the U.S. North American history, I mean, people don't realize when you know when you're looking at early Bigfoot history in the United States, there's some pretty shady people involved in that stuff. And I'm talking about gangsters. I'm talking about agency people. Pretty shady, and people have died.
Yep.
I don't know who I'm just a data miner, a researcher, but I'm telling you, there's some links. When people get involved in big theory, you're really getting involved in a real life. There's a lot of stuff going on, but there's a lot of stuff that I haven't covered, that I haven't touched on, which might be fodder for another day. But
Absolutely.
What I found interesting about this was the number of Bigfoot researchers that mysteriously died, and I'm not saying that they did that. I'm saying that they're looking for Bigfoot and stuff, and they might be canoeing or kayaking, to navigate from one point to another, and then they come up missing, and later found the drowned and stuff. This happens a lot. So the question is, and I read one of those books. I probably read all of them 3, 4, 5 times. When you start looking at that, are they all because of Bigfoot stuff? No, I don't think so. In fact, there's a lot of different reasons why people go missing. The person that I started out with on this show earlier had nothing to do with Bigfoot. It just brought me into that realm where I was looking at these different people. I never in my life thought that many people went missing. Never. But people go missing for different reasons, a lot of different reasons. But some of them, I believe very strongly Bigfoot does that. That's what they do. And so, I start looking at these things, and especially I look at these reports, especially if people say that they were Bigfoot researchers and stuff. Well, I start thinking they're out and things happen. And when you start seeing reports, and I've seen a couple of those missing 411 where this hunter is out, he went missing, find him, but they found his rifle, and it was bent in the shape of a U. I can't tell you how many times that's popped up in reports and stuff. A lot. We know for a fact that bears don't do it. Why would a bear do that? It's just unbelievable stuff. So,
it is.
Anyway,
really is.
Anyways, I don't know how long we've been on this, but it's. I'm gonna come out of here and thank you very, very much for the offer. I had a great time.
Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of cheers for Val.
There you are.
Guest on the show. I greatly appreciate that. Val, how does everybody get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me on Facebook right now if they like. Look for Michigan Bigfoot, Gumshoe Guys Corner. Got any questions they can ask me? I'm pretty easy to approach. Very, very busy, but easy to approach.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be a cast or a host on the show, email me at Grizzly the Paranormal at gmail.com. Once again, that's Grizzly the Paranormal at gmail.com. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's time of that evening from coast to coast and around the world. we say until the next show in 15 minutes. Until next time.
Thank you, Grizzly.
Absolutely, sir. It was my honor.